Thank
Welcome
you.
to another exciting edition of ESQ Practical Lawyers Academy free webinar series. We are glad that you could join us. My name is Susan Agu, and I'm a research and development staff at ESQ Training. At ESQ Training, our mission is to expand the frontiers of continuous professional learning. We offer courses and training across various areas of practice, which we have categorized into academies like the Litigation and Other Dispute Resolution Academy, Intellectual Property Law Academy, Energy, Oil and Gas Academy, Construction and Capital Project Academy, Capital Market Academy, among others. We have tagged this webinar series, Launch Our Webinar Series, as they're slated to hold at 1 p.m. during lunch break, and they will hold 3 times every week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. However, in order to accommodate our Muslim participants, the free webinars will hold at 11 on Fridays. After every session, we'll provide the resources in easily accessible format on the go for everyone who's interested. Also, currently registration is still ongoing for our training on power. It is a 12-week virtual distance learning course titled The Dynamics of Power Contracts Regulation, Contracts Negotiation, Documentation, and Project Financing. And it commenced yesterday, but you can still register. To get more information, please send a mail to o.solanke@esq-law.com. And our seasoned facilitators would advise professionals on the new industry trends and skills to flow in the new normal. On today's topic, we'll be looking at identifying updates in compliance in the world, gain an in-depth understanding of governance and risk, outline the steps to take as compliance officers in dealing with risk, and many more information that we passed across. We are privileged this morning to connect with our panel of experts. If you have any questions while the webinar is ongoing, please type in the Q&A or raise your hand. It is with great delight that I introduce the chair and moderator of today's webinar. His name is Mr. Adeyemi Johnson. He's a compliance consultant at European Central Counterparty. He's the managing director of Open Spaces Compliance Consultants. He is also an executive committee member of Nigerians in the Square Mile. He assists CEOs, board of directors, heads of compliance, and MLROs of financial services institutions to manage and mitigate their regulatory and AML risk and to navigate the increasingly complex regulatory landscape. So, Mr. Adeyemi, thank you for moderating this panel today, and we leave the rest for you to handle. Thank you so much.
Can I, before we go on, can I ask that you are seeing me as a person and not as a cat? Okay, because I think as we are all beginning to navigate this working from home Zoom thing, we are finding out that that technology is not so infallible. Can everybody hear me? Because I can't get any feedback.
We can hear you okay.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Judith. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Life is full of surprises because I wasn't expecting to be the chairman or moderator. I was just expecting to be here as a speaker. So again, like technology, life is full of surprises. So I'll try my best to moderate and to chair simultaneously. Just a brief intro about myself. You've heard my name, but I'll say it again. Yeah, my name is Adeyemi Johnson. I've been a compliance professional for give or take 23 to 25 years, primarily in the United Kingdom. But I guess the foundation of my career as a compliance consultant or as a compliance professional actually started in Nigeria in between 93 and 95, when I witnessed the implosion of the financial houses or finance house industry sector of the finance industry in Nigeria. And what struck me then, I was then on what we would call I was a poacher then. I was working with one of the better finance houses, stockbroking houses, Capital Bancorp, PLC. And I was struck by the fact that when you deregulate an economy, you actually need a very strong regulatory framework in place to actually make sure that the deregulation doesn't become the Wild West, which is what happened during the finance house sector. So that gingered my are interested in compliance, and I'm moving to the UK to study my master's, which I finished, but I'm still doing. In a way, I found myself in compliance. So I've been doing this for the past 25 years for various institutions. And before setting up Open Spaces in 2010, my last role was as the company secretary, MLRO, and head of legal for GT Bank UK. That's the UK subsidiary of Guarantee Trust Bank. So, which brings me to today. The topic before me to kickstart the session is really about the global trends in compliance. So essentially, what is happening in compliance all across the world. I think number one trend is that we are all working from home, all compliance officers. We are all working from home, all Zooming. But that in itself throws up a lot of challenges in the sense that because compliance compliance really works well in a face-to-face environment where you can see the people you're dealing with, because it relies a lot on communication, talking to people, influencing people, and you can do that a lot more successfully or much more efficiently when you're when you're seeing people face to face. So one of the things that we as compliance professionals are trying to navigate to understand is, how do we do compliance in this COVID-19 environment where we are all stuck at home? How do we undertake compliance monitoring? How do we do compliance surveillance? How do we develop policies? How do we influence? How do we monitor? How do we train whilst we are all sat at home, and also trying to, at the same time, trying to homeschool our kids, trying to avoid appearing as a cat on a Zoom video, the odd interruption. So that I guess that's one thing, that how do we do compliance in a situation where we're going to be 50 virtual, 50% working from how do we adapt our policies and procedures and our whole way of working to this new environment? Unfortunately, as we all know, we've not quite worked out the answer to that. We are all still trying to figure it out. But what I would say is that it's not the disaster that a lot of people thought it would be. I mean, as far as I know, there's been no major financial scandal erupting from people because of people working from home. That's in part also because technology has also moved on. So, which brings me to one of the global trends, is that there's going to be an increasing merging or an increasing influence of technology on compliance and regulation, and vice versa. So, but just to get into to give that as a background, to get into the talk proper, I think what I've tried to do is to structure this give it in three buckets, in terms of looking at the past, the present, and the future, to understand what are the global trends. Now, when I started in compliance, 1998, 99, you could compare compliance to almost like a funnel. So at the very end, it was quite narrow, because those days were the very, very early days of compliance, of compliance being recognized as a profession in its right. So it tended to be quite narrow, in the sense that as a compliance officer, what you would look at would be, okay, this is the law, or this is the regulation. This is what we need to focus on. The law says we should do A, B, C, and D. And that's just what we look on. That's just what we look at, because that is our expectation. No more, no less. And so it tended to be narrow. And what you would then have is that you would have compliance officers who wore many hats. They could be the company secretary, the head of legal. They would be doing the AML side of things. They would be doing everything but the actual business itself, because compliance wasn't seen as a profession in its own right, but just something, at least in the UK where I trained, compliance was seen as the profession where you put somebody who was just about to retire and put them out of harm's way and just put them in compliance. And compliance was way back at the back of it wasn't front office, it wasn't middle office. It was seen more as a back office function. So that was the trend. And of course, the regulatory framework itself was pretty much, or compared to what we have now, wasn't as developed then, although it seemed quite developed at that point in time. So for example, if you look at the evolution of the anti-money laundering laws and sanctions, if you compare what we have now to what we had in the 1990s, there wasn't anything like PEPs, there wasn't anything like sanctions, no, or CDD or enhanced due diligence. So it was quite narrow in the sense that we just focused on what the law said we should do. And what the law said we should do was quite narrow. And in fact, in some jurisdictions, there wasn't even anything like compliance. I remember way back in Nigeria then in 93, 95 when I was working, I bumped into a compliance officer at Nigerian American Merchant Bank. I'm sure it's no longer in existence. And I just wondered, what's the compliance officer? I guess from my legal background, I knew that compliance meant that, okay, you had to comply with something. But in terms of what this compliance officer was doing there, I just couldn't fathom. So in some jurisdiction, there wasn't even the concept of a compliance officer. So that was the past then. But if we now come into the future, where are we now? I think what we will see is that as we now have this funnel, we are now at the mouth of the funnel, which is a lot wider now. So in the sense that, aside from just focusing, so first things, the regulatory expectations or the regulatory burden on firms, not just financial institutions, but regulated industries, maybe in the power sector, in the telecom sector, the banking industry, the regulatory expectations has widened a lot. So they're under a lot more regulations than before. Each sector has its own regulations. So you have the pharmaceutical sector, which is heavily regulated. You have the finance sector, which is bombarded with regulation. You have the telecoms. So every sector operates under a lot more regulations than we did before. Then we also have the issue that regulation now focuses not just on what the law says, but on other extra things like ethics. One of the things that regulation and compliance look at now is ethics. How do firms behave ethically? How do we define ethics in a particular industry, in a particular area of function? What are the ethical implications of things we do? And we see this playing out in different jurisdictions. So I'm sure we're all aware of the recent issue with the I'm not sure if it's ex, but the suspended CEO of First City Monument Bank in Nigeria, who was allegedly involved in an extramarital affairs. That was not, on the bare face of it, no law was broken. They didn't infringe any CBN Act or any SEC regulation. This was more of an ethical/moral issue. But this is not limited to Nigeria alone. Even in America, the ex-CEO of McDonald's was dismissed from his job for having an affair with a consensual affair in which they both consented to it with one of his subordinates. Not only that, he's been sued for his the bonus he got when he left the job, because he was given a bonus of about, I think, $50 million plus for living on good terms. But when they found out about this affair, they now want the bonus back. So compliance and regulations are now looking at ethics. How do firms behave? We're also now looking at conduct, especially in the financial services sector. Conduct has become a key issue now in terms of our firm. We just don't want firms that behave in accordance with what the law says, but how are they conducting themselves? Are they conducting ethically? Are they conducting in the right way? Are they behaving in a manner that they won't expose their customers to undue risk? So compliance and regulation are focusing on conduct and ethical issues as well. And the interplay of both is that we're now beginning to move into the moral sector of things, which can, morality can be a very unruly horse that nobody knows where it will dump you on. So compliance and regulations are beginning to move on to that area. You also have things like ESG, environmental, social, and unfortunately I can't remember the G part of it, but ESG factors are coming into play in the sense that companies, whether they are in finance or other sectors, are expected to take into consideration the environment, their social impacts, and governance. How do these ESG factors that have not actually been defined properly, that we're still trying to understand it, compliance and regulation are now expected to focus on these things. And in fact, in the European Union, there's a new directive that came out about requiring companies to specifically consider ESG factors when looking at their operations. We have also things like the Slavery Act, which we are supposed to consider in the UK. So we can see that the scope of compliance, scope of regulation is widening, is getting wider and wider. Even if we now take it down to what we would consider core, and speaking for the financial services sector now, what we would consider core compliance issues like anti-money laundering, that is also even beginning to widen, because before, anti-money laundering was just money laundering. Are they laundering money or not? But now it's moved down it's now bifurcated into sanctions. Are you complying with sanctions, which is separate from money laundering itself? You also have anti-bribery and corruption. So before, all this were just under the generic name of anti-money laundering. But as we are beginning to see, anti-money laundering is on one hand now. You then have ABC, which is separate, is now separated from anti-money laundering. And then you also have sanctions, which is now separated. And believe me, if you look at the wordings of a typical sanctions itself, sanctions from the USA, you can understand why it's becoming quite specialized. I mean, some of the things that I do for the European Central Counterparty, where I'm doing some consulting work for them, is looking at their sanctions, how they deal with sanctions. And you'll be amazed how long it will take you to look at one particular sanction hit on your system. How you're able to actually identify what it means. You have to go into the actual sanctions directive itself to understand, is it this entity, is it this financial instrument? So everything is becoming wider and wider. Then also we have the data protection and privacy issue. Data protection in itself is becoming a critical issue for compliance officers and regulators. They're interested in how do we handle customers' data? How do we treat customers' data? How do we protect it? How do we ensure that we don't have more data than we need, and that we protect the data that we have? Nigeria has a data protection law. Every country in the EU has a data protection law, and it's becoming more and more stringent. I think 10, 15 years ago, data protection was like, what's that? We kind of knew it was there, but now it's become quite a topical issue, especially when we have Facebook, we have LinkedIn, we have Instagram, WhatsApp. With all our data, it's become a critical issue for regulators and indeed compliance professional worldwide. Most industries will have a data protection officer separate from the compliance officer. Before, you would have your compliance officer acting as your data protection officer, but that's no longer the case. So presently now, to just sum that up, is that the scope of regulation, as you know, compliance follows the regulator or follows the regulation. The scope of regulation is widening. It's covering a lot of areas now than before. And of course, that means that the role of the compliance officer is becoming more and more important. It's becoming more and more specialized now. So as a compliance officer, gone are the days where you could wear so many hats. It's difficult to be a general compliance officer now. We are probably getting to the stage where, if we are not already there, that is, where a compliance officer would have to specialize in one particular area. So maybe it will be you have a compliance officer in AML, you're specializing in conduct, you're specializing in sanctions, because each of these topics that I've just sort of briefly spoken about they have their own large body of regulation and consequences, and it's difficult for one person to be able to deal with. When I started in compliance with Investec Guinness Flight in the UK, I was dealing with data protection, AML, you name it, everything, just shove it to compliance. I was a generalist. That's difficult. I couldn't operate in that kind of environment anymore now, because the amount of things I would have to cover as one person would just be way beyond my ability to cover. So that is the present. And one other thing also that presently that we are seeing now is that there's an increasing reliance on technology for compliance. So we're going to be seeing a lot more use of technology in the compliance space. So for instance, if you're, particularly in the financial services industry, if you're doing monitoring, you find that people use technology a lot to do their surveillance, to do trade surveillance, to see that people are people doing insider trading. Because of the amount of data that they have to sift through, people are using technology a lot more. We are also using technology as tools for our work. So for instance, in those days when new journals come in, and we wanted them to make sure that they read the policies and procedures, we would either give it to them in hard copy and get them to sign off, or send it to them by email. But companies are getting bigger. Suddenly we have 5,000 employees splashed across maybe 4 or 5 jurisdictions, or for a banking or for an industry in Nigeria that has branches in different states. It's difficult to do that in person, and even by email. How do you track it that they've actually read this policy? So what we are now using is that there are lots of tools out there for, there's one that I know of called, I think it's Workflow, or I can't remember, Worker or something. Anyway, it's tools that allow you to disseminate your policies and procedures to individuals within your company, and to also track if they've actually read it, when they've read it, and also for you to track their attestation to it. In the area of training as well, technology is playing an increasing role. Before, when we wanted to train people, it had to be done face to face, and then we would get our PowerPoints and have the PowerPoint slide with all the fancy graphics. But now there are lots of training tools where you can actually develop bespoke training, where it's got nice graphics. You can have a test afterwards, so you can test participants' knowledge of what you've trained them on. You can track which questions they failed to answer properly. So it actually gives you the ability to customize the training to suit the audience. So technology is playing an increasing role in the field of compliance, but also technology is also influencing regulations. So if you look at things like new technologies coming on the Facebook, okay, which brings the issue of how are they using our data. You also have the use of AIs, artificial intelligence, to simplify decision making in a lot of industries. So like insurance, the insurance industries, banking industry for credit application. A lot of firms are using AI to basically do their credit scoring and to assess volume application as to whether this applicant meets their criteria. So the key issue there is that, okay, these AIs are based on algorithms, but who is checking the algorithms to ensure that there are no implicit bias built into this algo? So for instance, as an example, if you have, because this is a topical issue in this part of the world, if you have an algorithm that's been built entirely by men without any female input, there's the tendency that it will ask questions and assess things from a male-centric point of view, such that the decisions that this AI, when this AI is put into play to assess maybe application, it's going to assess things from a male point of view, because that's how it's been built. So the industry and regulators are asking questions that, okay, these AIs that are being built, how do we prevent them from being biased because they've been built in a certain way? How do we check that they're actually neutral and they're not actually being biased in the judgment that they make? So that's an area that compliance will begin to get involved in terms of, because AI is being used in a lot of industries now to streamline decision making. How do we ensure that these things don't perpetuate bias? And it's quite important because, for example, in America, in some states in America, they use artificial intelligence for sentencing. So this AI will determine that, okay, but what they found out is that these algorithms have an implicit bias against African Americans, just because of the data it uses. It uses a lot of data which is tilted negatively towards African Americans. So of course, so when that AI sees an African American defendant, it just automatically puts them into that bucket and spews out a decision. So people are not questioning, how are these things built? And of course, that would mean at some point in time, compliance, be it in a technology company, in a banking industry or pharmaceutical, wherever, where they use AI, would have to get involved in the issue of our AI is used. How do we ensure that there's no implicit bias? So that's another area that is going to have, that is one of the global trends in compliance. So in summary, because I know I've been speaking for quite a while, I would summarize it right now in the sense that the global trend towards compliance now is that we are going to have a lot to do in so many areas. We're going to, technology is going to influence what we do tremendously. It's going to impose a lot more responsibilities on us because technology, the influence of technology on every area of human life is increasing. So the compliance function and the regulators will look more into the use of technology. How are we using technology in the different areas of our life, and what are the implications? Compliance will begin and regulation will begin to look more at the ethical and moral side of things. That's going to become an increasing area of responsibility for compliance officers and regulators. For the compliance officer, how do you draw up an ethical compliance framework for your industry? How do you train your people? How do you get them to be ethical in their behavior? How do you define ethics for your own industry? How do you get the board buying into ethical issues? Because these are soft issues, they're not hard issues. And then layered on top of that will be just keeping up to date with your pure compliance stuff in whatever industry you are. If you're in the banking industry, the increase in sanctions, use of sanctions, AML responsibilities, prudential regulation, conduct of business, monitoring. So for me, those are the critical issues for compliance officers going forward. So expect a lot more. Our responsibilities will continue to increase. Hopefully our pay will go up in line with our responsibilities, but I don't think we should hold our breath on that. The ride will be interesting, it will be varied, and a lot will be expected of us. Thank you very much. I hope you all heard me, and I just haven't been speaking to myself for the last 20 minutes or so. But that is the end of my session, and I'm happy to take questions at this stage from members of the audience. Maybe I should ask, let me start by asking a question. What do we see as compliance officers? What do we see as our greatest challenge right now as compliance officers?
Hello, good morning.
Sorry, I can hear. Yes, good morning.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Do not think that nobody has been.
Should I go ahead?
Okay, I think you should go ahead then.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Courtney Vaughan, and I have been following the recent, I'm going to say, actions by the Central Bank of Nigeria on the cryptocurrency industry. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to how does compliance play into that? Is there some existing compliance program within banking institutions from your observation, or even the cryptocurrency exchanges in Nigeria? And do you think they are actually adequate to support, what's happening in the environment, such as anti-money laundering and also sanctions, etc.?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question about cryptos, because as you can see, I didn't really talk about cryptocurrencies in my presentation. That wasn't deliberate though. I somehow just skipped that. But the honest truth is we are all struggling to understand what cryptocurrencies is all about. Nobody, at least in my case, I don't understand it fully. My daughter is always telling me about, oh, Dad, put some money in Ethereum and all that. But cryptocurrencies presents a very, very interesting challenge for compliance and regulators, actually. And regulators are struggling to understand what it's all about, because from what I know about cryptos, like money now, the CBN can print money, They go to the mint, print the money. They know how much is in circulation, or at least have a good idea of how much is in circulation. They can control it. But with cryptocurrencies, you can't really control it because it's generated by data by Bitcoin miners in different currencies in different places all around the world. So this presents a lot of challenges for regulators. In terms of in terms of what can be done, from what what I've seen operating over here is that we are trying to understand, okay, this is what it means for regulation wise. These are the risks it presents, which is in terms of money laundering. So I suppose one of the things that you can do as compliance officer is to basically apply the same kind of due diligence standards you would apply to anybody doing traditional investments to the cryptocurrency world. That will not change, whether it's cryptos or you still want to know who is this person, who are they, where's their money coming from, and basically you want to do your due diligence, the same kind of due diligence that you would do for somebody who wants to open a bank account or open an investment management relationship with you, is what you'd want to do for somebody who wants to invest or who's dealing in cryptos, or even or what the crypto exchanges should do with their customers. So the standards shouldn't change. In fact, it should be a lot more higher. I think you then have to layer on top of that with some understanding of what is this thing. So, and you want to try and simplify it. So I think whether it's cryptos, ultimately it has, whoever is investing in the crypto must either have put money into, must have bought it with some cash somewhere. So the initial investment in cryptos, where did that come from? The investment, the crypto that has been purchased, where is that crypto? Which exchange has it? So you basically want to do the same thing that you would do for fiat currency when somebody's investing traditional assets, in terms of trying to understand who they are, what's the purpose of the investment, where are the monies into the investment coming from. I think that's what you want to do. In terms of the regulatory response to it, I'm not sure whether banning it is the right way, but I can understand CBN from a point of that. Sometimes if you don't understand something, you're best banning it, because people can and will lose a lot of money from investing in cryptos. But perhaps what they need to do is to have a more collaborative approach with the crypto exchanges to understand what they do, and basically leave it to investors to decide that, okay, or basically what I would say is that what they would have to do is that ensure that, make the crypto exchanges ensure that whoever they take on is aware of the risk of investing in cryptos. So this should only be open to what I would call professional investors, which is the framework that we have in the UK. Yeah, the FCA has said numerous number of times that we don't regulate cryptos. You can lose your shirt on cryptos, and whoever invests in cryptos should be a professional investor. And that's what the CBN should enforce on the exchanges, that only take on professional investors and have a framework for defining professional investors. I hope I was able to answer your question, Courtney.
Yes, you did fabulously. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There was a gentleman who wanted to ask a question just before you. I don't know if he wants to ask his question now.
So, Yemi, if you were referring to me, I wasn't going to ask a question. I was just going to answer you to say that we actually heard you, in case you wondered you were audible. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. You've just made my day.
That's
I can see Judith smiling now. So good. You've made my day. Thanks. So
okay,
I don't know if Yes.
Much
Are there any other?
for your presentation. Hello,
Sorry.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. And we want Mrs. Akinosho to make her presentation.
That's why she was smiling. That, come on, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Okay. Thank you.
I actually thought that was quite exhaustive what you covered, and I just wanted to make sure I had some time to answer the question around whether you can be both a compliance officer and a data protection officer as well. You covered quite exhaustively the key questions, I think, for this session, and I'm going to introduce myself briefly and do it from the approach of someone who is very much in the trenches of doing compliance work day to day. So my name is Judith Akiosho. I'm Chief Compliance Officer, Global Head of Compliance for S&P Global Platts and Market Intelligence. And I think you covered very well the changes that we've seen in the past year from COVID as it affects the compliance industry. And you spoke about the past, the present, and the future. There were a couple of things I would probably push back on. And I want to do that in answering the question about if you can both the compliance officer and data protection officer. You mentioned about, it being quite difficult to be a generalist as a compliance officer. And I'd actually say that you can be, and by virtue of the roles that we play, you almost have to be. So most compliance officers or compliance departments, to your point about it being a place people went to retire, they're not that well funded. That you don't have 200 people in the compliance function. So you do have to wear several hats. And I think we have a very good audience here in terms of our colleagues in the legal field, because compliance is part of what we do as lawyers. The skill sets are almost the same. You have curiosity of mind. If you're able to read regulations, if you're able to apply the law to the facts, you're going to do great in compliance. The one caveat I want to make, when I saw the topic, I thought it's quite broad, and there's compliance that is varied by your jurisdiction, by your regulatory landscape, by the kind of regulators you have and whether they enforce the regulations, by the sector you operate in, by your organization and the culture therein. So as a compliance officer, you have so many different stakeholders, your board, your CEO, but more importantly, there's a comment you made about, ESG and the future and, the FCMB case. I think you're right that the future is we're moving to stakeholder management, not just shareholder management. And what makes you a really successful compliance officer that most of us probably already have the skills for is being able to understand the risk in your organization or the risk for your client. It's not broad, it's specific. So to use the quick example of even cryptocurrencies, it's specific. So it will affect companies differently depending on your role in the whole journey. Are you advertising? Are you on the buy side? Are you on the sell side? But I think coming back to 2 points I want to make quick. What's the future? Compliance is going to become more involved in strategic decision making for organizations. And I think COVID has shown us that. We've moved to almost 100% remote working. And where your success is at the processes and policies you had in place before COVID happened. Did you already have policies? Did you already have an operations manual? How do you operate? And what you're doing at this point in time is tweaking it. So to your comment about, people coming on board in a remote environment, hiring practices are still going on. People are still getting hired. But you as a compliance officer are not going to that meeting. You're going to do it remotely. So it goes back to what is your engagement with your organization? That's the key. It's partnership with the organization. Who are your stakeholders? Who are the people in HR you're talking to? Who are the technology people you're talking to? So I think what has happened with COVID and what we're seeing is an acceleration of things that have been coming from the back. Training, you're not going to do training one-to-one every time because you can only cover so many offices and on so many days. So just having or being plugged into the direction your company is going in. If your company doesn't have technology, you're not going to be able to, you're still going to struggle to provide onboarding for new joiners. And as far as, we're working from home, companies are deciding, do people want to work from home a bit more, or do they have to come into the office? So you need to adapt your policies to a hybrid environment. But it all goes back to, what did you do before COVID? What policies did you, what was your framework before COVID? And you have to always do this in context. I think compliance is always context specific. what's your industry, what does your board want? And then the last point I think I'll make is just making sure we're staying ahead of change in regulation. We are going to see change in regulation. And the way to adapt to that is understanding your universe. What do we do? What are we trying to do? And you have to do it with building deep partnerships internally to be successful. The last point I'll make is that as lawyers, we're well placed to act as compliance officers who can wear different hats, because you won't always have the resources to hire an AML specialist, an ABC specialist. Sometimes you have to do the whole thing. So I just want to say, don't be afraid to be a generalist. Your value is having a seat at the table when the decisions are being taken really early on. So for example, should we move from this side to this other side? You want them to be speaking with you, or you want to be in that room having that conversation early. So you might say, well, if we do that, can staff actually get that? Are there other things we need to factor in? So big advice would be look at compliance holistically in the context of your business, your industry, your jurisdiction. I think that would be my 2 cents. And so to the person who asked the question, if you're already a compliance officer, you can be a data protection officer. You just need to have more understanding of more laws. It's the same rules. How do they apply to us? And I think before I allow Ayobami to come, and I just want to say that as compliance officers, we need to scan the horizon all the time. There are regulations that are in place that may not be enforced, but you need to you need to monitor the risk. How much risk can we accept that we're not putting these rules in place? Are they going to enforce it? So know your environment. That's what I'll say. Thank you.
Okay, just before I introduce the next speaker, I want to say thank you very much, Judith, for in the 10 minutes that you've spoken or less, you've actually spoken about one of the key attributes of a successful compliance officer, being able to be part of the decision-making, influencing decision-making in the organization, and that's where our value as compliance officer comes from. It's not so much in terms of knowing what a firm should or shouldn't do. I'm being able to say the rule book says this or that, but it's being able to influence our company moving in the right direction. And thank you very much for speaking about that. My views on the compliance officer and data protection officer, we'll have to have some more argument about that. I'm not entirely convinced, but thank you very much. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, to call on our next speaker, Mr. Ayobami Adisa. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Adeyemi, and thank you very much, Judith. You guys have actually made compliance appear to be simple as ABC. I mean, the way you've been able to break it down and the way you've been able to speak about it. So my name is Ayobami Adisa. I'm Associate Director and Head of Compliance for IHS Stars. It's a telecommunication infrastructure company. We build infrastructure for all telecoms or for major telecoms operators in Nigeria, and we are the largest in Africa. In South America, and we are number 5 in the world when it comes to telecoms infrastructure service provisioning. I'm a lawyer by training, and I wandered into compliance about 8 years ago, or 9, when I used to head the legal department of InterSwitch before I was asked to actually start managing compliance for the organization. I mean, this was something I said, no, I wouldn't do until I went for one early morning breakfast meeting with some guys from multinational organizations from the US embassy in Nigeria. And I said, wow, this is real. It's a real-time job. And the day I met with the former compliance officer for Microsoft, I would just say what we ended the conversation with. He said, look, I retired and I bought myself a forest. So that told me that, look, there's real money in this thing. So let me just focus on it. So when Larry approached me to come and speak about the updates in the compliance environment, coincidentally, it came to a point when I was searching for a senior manager for a compliance role in my organization. And I checked out the CVs, and at the end of the day, by the time HR forwarded the CVs that got to me, and I saw about 75 CVs, and I could just pick one out of it as, okay, this person can work with me. I wasn't going to do any spoon feeding. I said, I need someone with that between 6 and 7 7 years experience in compliance. And I took the pain to interview about 5 or 6 of them. And what I got from them is I'm a compliance officer in a stock exchange company, compliance officer in the bank, compliance officer in this company and that company. And I keep hearing I'm in charge of filing reports, I'm in charge of filing returns. And I said, look, guys, compliance has gone beyond this. So because of that, I told Larry that, look, I wasn't going to do anything about updates. Let's take it from the scratch. But I'm so happy that you guys you've made it look so simple. You've made it so straightforward, and you've said everything about it. I was just going to start from the major 7 elements of an effective compliance program. I was going to start from it, let everybody understand it, let everybody understand the fact that it's not about what you're filing. It's not about CAC anymore. It's not about NSC anymore. It's not about SEC anymore. It's about the regulation, the statutes, your ethics, the policies that you've adopted, the standards that you've subscribed to within the organization, and the things that are actually going on globally right now, generally. I asked one of the people I was interviewing, do you know what a rule book is? And he said, no, he's been working as a compliance officer for the past 7 years. He doesn't know what a rule book is. And I said, okay, wow. I understand. I was there before. So most lawyers right now, when we're looking at compliance, we look at Companies and Allied Matters Act. We look at any act or statutes that applies to us as an industry. So, and I'm saying no. So I saw a question or a comment from someone right now saying that, look, how do you convince management as to establishing compliance? Probably because you guys are outside of Nigeria. You don't know how it operates. I've worked in an organization before where I told the CEO that we need to get a whistleblower platform. He said, what do you mean by a whistleblower platform? I'll buy a whistle for all of you guys. You start blowing the whistle. It was so low at that point in time. So we're still at the level of convincing our CEOs on the importance of compliance, not only from the regulatory standpoint. People do not actually know that part of the major policies you need to have as an organization, as a compliance person within an organization, is the conflict of interest policy, as simple as that. People do not know that right now you need to have the whistleblower platform. It has to be independent of you. It shouldn't be around you. People do not even know that compliance now plays in the risk-based compliance program, where you check your risk register at the beginning of the year and say, look, what are the major risks? What are the major compliance risks that we have as an organization? What are the things that our guys, what are they doing in relation to ethics? So what other mechanism do we have? What other tools do we have? I had Adeyemi speak about the tools that he's got. There's so many of them. How do you do third-party risk monitoring right now? Because your third parties are a major risk to you. Look, anti-money laundering has gone beyond the normal. I deposit $10,000, I take $10,000 out, I cannot transfer. That's what we call the trade-based money laundering right now. That people are being very, very more. I mean, they are being smarter with the way things are going. And so there are a lot, and you guys have covered a lot. I really do not have much to add to it, other than the fact that I was going to talk about the 7 elements, how you really need to have the tone at the top before you can have an effective compliance program. What is your management saying? What is your CEO saying? Are they really subscribe to this, you having this compliance program? Because in the real sense of it, compliance is very, very expensive.
Yep.
It is not for a cheap organization. It is not for an organization that does not have the financial capacity to bear it, especially in the region where we operate right now. I mean, the country where I operate right now. You can actually lose a $5 billion contract because of the fact that somebody is asking for a $1 million bribe. Your employees really need to understand the importance of turning down that. Look, what type of policies do you have within your organization? Have you developed any code of conduct? What do you stand for as an organization? What are your values? Because those are the things that will drive the policies that you have as an organization. Look, do you have a designated compliance officer, or is it your chief legal officer that is actually the compliance officer? So the guy that is teaching your management how to avoid some regulatory pitfalls is the same guy that is telling you this is how to be compliant. Do you still have that within your organization? How well do you communicate your position as an organization to your employees? What kind of awareness and trainings are you giving? And I like the fact that Adeyemi mentioned the fact that COVID has taught us a lot. You really need to adopt technology right now. I mean, for instance, I work in an organization where we operate in about 10 different countries of the world. And I need to bring all my suppliers onto a particular platform and teach them or train them about compliance. Do I visit each of these countries in COVID-prone globe right now? No, I can't. So I need technology. How am I doing it? How am I disseminating information? Right now, the mobile phone is there. Today, I can tell you that I've got a lot of trainings the people really will get on their phone right now. Compliance has gone beyond that guy that I remember when I first started. I have an uncle that was working in the bank that told me that I know the next time I see you, I should be looking forward to killing roaches from your jackets, because that is what compliance officers wear. It has gone beyond that now. Oh, yeah. We're now professionals. So what type of reporting line do you have? Do people really trust it? Can I go to that reporting line and say that I want to blow the whistle on someone who's done something? Do you have a non-retaliation policy? What is your position? What's the position of your organization with regards to, oh, am I going to retaliate, or is somebody going to retaliate against me because of the fact that I've exposed them? Do I really need to be right before speaking out or speaking up? Do I really need to know? Do I really need to catch the person? What confidence do I have? How often do I get to hear from my management to say, guys, do the right thing all the time? Then the other thing is that, look, how well or how quick do we respond to a quick whistleblower? Then, look, what makes you think your compliance program is actually effective after all, if you do not conduct a review and audit or an audit of your compliance program? I was actually going to look into that holistically to say that, look, let's break it down and let's start picking the pieces from where we are in, especially where I am. I know you folks are over there in UK, US. You know, people start asking me, Ayo, why must I comply with UK bribery law? And I said, look, we're in bed with organizations outside of Nigeria. Then somebody tells me that what is my own with USFCPA? And I said, look, go and ask Ali Button. You really need to know what happened to Ali Button, and you know what's happening. So there's so many things happening right now within the compliance space. Yes, there's so many updates. It goes beyond the regular, I'm just doing monitoring by checking the books. It goes to speak to about the quarterly monitoring. It goes to speak about your third parties. It goes even, I have taken it beyond third parties. I even go into fourth parties, because your fourth parties can be a major issue other than the third parties. So yes, and just to wrap it up, I have always put compliance in about 4 different buckets: regulatory compliance, statutory compliance, ethics, and standards. And by standards, I mean what you yourself as an organization you've subscribed to. Because you come here now, maybe like an electronic payment company or a bank, you say, look, I'm subscribing to PCI DSS or an ISO. Of course, you need to comply with the provisions of those standards. You really need to operate within the framework that those standards have created, if you're still going to be a member of it. And the reputation you lose by somebody saying that, look, when you go to the face of the newspaper and you say, I am ISO 27001 certified, and ISO comes and says, no, it's no more certified. What does it do to your